ready. Looking forward to hearing your testimony.
Hello again, and thank you for having me. Committee members have been hearing a lot of testimony about this deal and about this site from a lot of diverse perspectives, and I just wanted to point out what I think ought to be the legislative takeaways from this experience of having SanDisk decide that they no longer wanted to build a series of chip fabricators in the state of Michigan. The first is just to notice how much incentives were talked about in this deal. There was $6 billion signed or included in the letter of intent. And that's not including all of the possible money that this company was going to get from the federal government. And what you should note is that of that $6 billion, only around $259 million of that had been authorized by law. $5.9 billion of that required new programs, new legislation, new appropriations from legislators. And so this was a state agency not administering what had already been approved in law, but rather agreeing to lobby on behalf of this private company for more. I don't believe that that is what our state economic development agency should be doing. It is legislators' job to establish economic development policy in the state of Michigan. Now, you can ask the MEDC for their experience and guidance in crafting your economic development policies, but it should be your decision, and state agencies shouldn't be here to lobby on behalf of a private company. Now, the $6 billion is a lot. If you look at the database from Good Jobs First, which tracks these deals across the country, that would have been the fourth largest incentive package ever offered to a company, with only deals for Micron, Amazon, and Boeing exceeding the $6 billion amount. It is a large amount of subsidies, and very little of which was authorized by statute. But the other thing to note is that that letter of intent was confidential information. It was not disclosed until the company had already announced that it was no longer seeking to operate this project. I don't think we should be offering billions of dollars to secret companies and not telling people about who they're offering it to or how much our administrators have decided to offer these companies. That is a legislative choice. Now, some of the testimony from residents has been frustration that they didn't know what is going on with this deal. I think there's a legislative improvement that can be made. I've long recommended that before deals are entered, people have access to what is being agreed before it is agreed to so that they can voice their opinions. I think the legislation should be introduced that also covers things that aren't authorized by law yet. So these letters of intent, memorandums of understanding, or other agreements that the state makes ought to be public information before they're entered into. The other takeaway is just how many non-disclosure agreements are involved in these deals now. This is a growing trend in economic development, but it's not a good trend. Signing non-disclosure agreements doesn't ensure that the state gets a better deal for its incentives. It doesn't ensure that that the deals are more economically beneficial to the state of Michigan. What it does is stymie the voice of opposition before deals are signed. That's a legislative decision that they can enter into these non-disclosure agreements, but that ought to be a policy that legislators reconsider, because I don't think this serves a public purpose. Legislators also ought to reconsider the structure of the site's preparation program. $259 million has been authorized for this deal, and that money is gone, regardless of whether any company locates on this site. Now, economic development administrators believe that someone is going to show up in this location, that money will not be wasted. But when you look at the structure of site preparation deals, it ensures that taxpayer costs happen regardless of whether there are any economic development purposes served later. There are no clawbacks on these deals. when you sign deals for site preparation money, you ensure that taxpayer money is spent. And this taxpayer money is being spent specifically for someone's private benefit. These are private, profit-seeking companies who are looking to engage in trade, find mutually beneficial agreements, and come out ahead. It should not be the public's role in paying for their cost of development. This ought to be something that is simply the role for private investment. But while I think that's a question about the proper role of government, I think some legislators might have a broader want to have a broader standard of whether site preparation makes sense or not. And one of those standards is the state going to come out ahead if it makes these site preparation deals? And if you look at the way the program is structured, it's a very limited window that would allow for the state to actually profit from these deals, because in order for the state to come out ahead, a company has to locate on the site specifically because of all the work that the state has done. Otherwise, the company would likely show up at some other site in the state of Michigan. Another thing is that the company that chooses to locate in that site would also have to have no Michigan competitors. Otherwise, its gains might come at the loss of another Michigan company, and with the state kind of breaking even on those transactions. The company that locates in the site must actually meet expectations. As we've seen, the state has a terrible track record of turning job announcements into reality. And so therefore, site preparation ensures that there are costs, but the actual economic benefits are going to be uncertain. And then finally, the company that locates on the site also has to be subject to all of the state's taxes, rather than getting additional tax abatements that can last over a series of years, which ensures that the state does not get a return on its investment. So I think site preparation money ought to be under a much stricter scrutiny, and that if legislators take a little bit of skepticism towards the effects of these programs, they'll find out that it often comes out behind. Now, the other thing that I think legislators ought to consider is whether it's getting a good deal when it makes these types of deals. And I think whether it gets a good deal or not depends on the standards that you apply. And I talked about this in testimony before. So what standards ought to apply to economic development projects? And for this one in particular, I think you can do a simple cost benefit. The costs are how much money you're going to give to this company, and the benefits are how much economic activity the company provides. Now, if you look at the deal, the company was going to get around $2.2 billion in cash over the short term, with the rest in cash payments over the longer term. Now, $2.2 billion is a lot of money in the state budget. That's roughly 4.6% of the state spending from state resources in the current fiscal year. It's enough to run the Department of Corrections for an entire year. That is a substantial hit on the state budget. And the benefit that was proposed for this was 9,400 jobs over 10 years. Now, 9,400 jobs, nothing to sneer at. That's a lot of people's livelihoods. But in the grand scheme of Michigan's economy, that's 0.2% of current employment. And that's, again, to be added over 10 years. And that's overstating the economic effects of this project, because the state's economy is constantly turning over. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're creating and losing over 200,000 jobs every 3 months. And to put 9,400 jobs in addition over 10 years would simply not have a noticeable effect on the state's economic trends. In other words, this is a project that proposes to have a substantial effect on the state budget without having a substantial effect on the state economy. And I think the standard that legislators ought to have for its economic development programs, and I've heard legislators talk about these for decades, and I do think that they want to improve the state economy. They want to compete with other states. They want to win jobs. They want to have a material effect on the state economy when they're handing out these deals. But the way that these deals are being structured is that they'll have a substantial effect on the state budget without having those economic returns that legislators want. So if you look at this experience, I think there are some takeaways. Review access, allow people to have access before approval. Make sure that legislators and administrators can talk about what they're agreeing to with the public before deals are made. You should review the site selection or site preparation money, and you should try to establish a clear standard for what you want to accomplish with your economic development programs. I think if you can do any or all of those, we're going to come out ahead. We're going to learn some valuable lessons from this experience. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Well, thank you, James, for your testimony. One thing you mentioned was the $2.2 billion in the cash payments out of the gate, and that equates to 4.6% of the budget. To put that into context, yet we're seeing 0.2% of employment with the 9,400 jobs for the state of Michigan, and that's assuming they even hit their 9,400, because according to their track record, if they're closer to 10% of that, that'd be 0.02%. But we'll just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that will be the miraculous time that they actually come through with the jobs that they expected. 0.2% of employment and paying 4.6% of the budget. Does that seem like a good investment to you?
So I believe some of you have mentioned like what else you can accomplish in the state budget for $2 billion. And I think that's, again, like an appropriate standards. What's the opportunity cost? What else can we do with this money? I think there's some basic things that the state can accomplish that would have a stronger economic effect than handing it over to private profit-seeking companies in the hope that they will create jobs when the state has, as you noted, and as I've mentioned before, has a terrible track record of turning job announcements into actual jobs.
Good, yeah, and we'll start turning over to questions when committee members have any, but I'll ask you another one here. You recently wrote that the MEDC wouldn't have much to do if the legislature stopped approving corporate handouts. Is it safe to say that this private-public partnership is actually in a situation of waste, fraud, and abuse, or what is this?
Yes. So when you review the academic literature of the economists who use sophisticated methods to isolate the economic effects of selective incentive programs, sometimes they find positive effects. Most of the time they find negative effects, but they never find large effects. When legislators say they want to improve the state's economy by handing out select deals to select companies, they should know that the tools are not sufficient to accomplish the task that they want. And because of that, if lawmakers think that they're going to change the direction of the state economy by picking the right companies, writing the biggest checks to the biggest companies, they're simply not going to accomplish that task. And if they think that they are going to do that, then they are going to be wasting taxpayer money.
Looks like we have a question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here again. So I've always had questions on how we figure out, oftentimes when we're talking about economic development, there will be a multiplier. If we're going to create this many jobs, it's actually, there's a residual effect in the community of actually this many jobs. And that's a very debatable number. Does Mackinac Center have a number that they think is accurate? Like if you bring in 9,400 jobs, how does that trickle out into the community? Because I'm just doing the math on how much income tax is this going to generate for the state over 10 years. And it's, I mean,
yeah. So I
need 100 years to recoup the $2 billion, you know.
So I have
50 years.
on our site, it's a really interesting thing, which is the use of all the multiplier analyses there. And most of them are about spending multipliers, which is, you know, the state saying, look, if we spend $1 on rapid transit, it's going to generate $40 worth of economic benefits. But there are also employment multipliers as well. And I've talked with some of my economist friends about these things. And one of the basic problems that they have with these assessments is that they assume that the money just falls from the sky, which is if you model the economic multipliers, you also need to model the economic costs, which is to say that the multiplier assessments, if you use the same methods, you can find out which places you're going to have a bigger bang for the buck above alternative uses of spending. So it's not that if we give $1 to this company, it's going to create $3 worth of tax benefits, but rather you have to compare that to, okay, well, what happens if we build that money with, or build a road with that money that we otherwise would have spent. And that's the appropriate, like if you can use multiplier assessments, say, look, all things being equal, we can have a bigger economic effect for one type of spending versus the other. But often what these things are used to is to justify their existence in the first place, which is to say, look, if we give this company money, we're going to come out ahead. So did I get to
Yeah, so just to make sure that I'm clear, when you talk about the gardening method of how do we attract businesses, right? You have to have you garden for them instead of hunt for them. So you have to have a good tax policy. You have to have energy policy. You need infrastructure in place. So when we're comparing these cash benefit to a $2.2 billion cash deal, and what will the economic output be from that? What we should also be looking is if we spent that $2.2 billion in another place, what would also be the economic output of that?
Absolutely.
So, okay. Yeah.
And you can do those assessments if you want to. I rarely see them done, but I think that would be a clever and sophisticated way of judging your economic development policy. Because if you have an economic development policy, it should have clear economic benefits above alternative uses of spending.
Thank you.
And what you two are talking about there is a clear example of looking at the opportunity cost. And whether we're spending this money elsewhere, whether it's on roads or something else, or if we just look at these billions and billions of dollars that are coming from the taxpayers and say to ourselves, the 10 million different ways that money could have been spent if people had that money in their pockets, spent it elsewhere here, spent it elsewhere there, made market decisions of their own in a voluntary marketplace, in a free market, without confiscating their money for essentially planned private businesses' benefit. What type of economic output would we have gotten from those 10 million people spending their money as they saw fit instead of having it confiscated from them for this one specific project? If somebody wants to build this big mega site, more power to them. Build it yourself, sell your product, and make a profit. That's the American dream. And thank you for sharing the opportunity cost with us today, the two of you. That was a good conversation. Moving on to another question I have is regarding the site prep and the scrutiny that's gone over the lack of transparency with this process. From what I saw down there, the $250 million, it's unclear to me yet where they're getting this money to bulldoze houses in the church. My understanding would be it's probably from the SSRP, $250 million. That's my best understanding. I haven't seen that confirmed yet, but I would like to know that answer. We might need some assistance. Maybe the MEDC will let us know. That would be nice if they can get back on that one. So I'll reach out to them to try to get confirmation. But what I saw when I was down there were a lot of people, far more NDAs signed than we had originally thought, because the homeowners are signing non-disclosure agreements. And it's not that they're part of this overall scheme, it's that they're subjected to this. And when people come to you and say, hey, you can sell your $325,000 house for $600,000, just sign this non-disclosure agreement and don't talk about your deal, or possibly even more. I'm hearing rumors that some people got over double of the market value for their house. And but people had signed NDAs, so they were quite tight-lipped about it. But rumors get around, and ultimately got to me going down there and talking to the community. And all of these NDAs are just further suppressing the knowledge that people have on this. Well, we have this $250 million being spent. Is it being spent on site preparation or buying out people's houses to bulldoze them? Some houses that are only a year or two old.
In this case, I think it's for both, but buying people's homes is probably the expensive thing. But I think you are right, is that if you are uncomfortable with the non-disclosure agreements that are being signed over these economic development deals, you can change the rules. That is in the legislature's possibility of saying that we don't want anyone, economic development officials or otherwise, signing non-disclosure agreements over economic development deals. I think that's legislation you can consider, and that ought to consider, because I don't think these non-disclosure agreements are serving a public purpose.
Thank you. Looks like we have a question from Minority Vice Chair Wagella.
Hi, thanks for being here. So I think well documented, me and the chair on opposite sides of the political spectrum. I know that Good Jobs First is a left-leaning policy group, and Mackinac Center, at least in my opinion, is a right-leaning one. We've seen under both Republicans and Democrats in different administrations over the past 30 years, continuing to do this kind of what they call economic development, what I would call corporate handouts. We've seen it over and over again, and we haven't seen, in my view, the evidence that it's working. We've seen evidence that it hasn't. So my question is, even though there are people on both sides of the political spectrum who both approve and disapprove of these, I think your average person, you ask people, regular working class person, should we be giving tax dollars to, multi-million and billion-dollar corporations? Their answer would be no. But why do you think this keeps happening? Why do these institutions of power continue to give public taxpayer money to private capital?
It's because businesses ask for it. I think that's the primary reason, is that business comes and say, look, we've got this facility. We're going to bring some jobs. You just need to give us some extra money. And I think legislators, policymakers make a political calculation and say this can be good. This can be bad. But I mean, as you saw from this case, the company asked for $6 billion, and at least its economic development administrator thought that was a good idea. It wasn't legislators coming up with these new programs, these new ideas. It was the business asking for something, and then having policymakers respond to the request.
And then my follow-up, has the Mackinac Center ever tracked donations from these companies to lawmakers? I just am curious if organizations have done that legwork to see what kind of influence that might be having.
Yeah, I think there have been a couple of papers on that subject, but we haven't covered that issue. And again, I think one of the reasons is that, as legislators, I'm going to have mostly good idea, like when you say you're doing this to, or when legislators say they're giving companies extra money, they really sound like they want to create jobs. They want to improve the state economy. I don't think it's because these companies have made enough campaign contributions, favors, or other things with all the legislators. Now, maybe that's not the case, but I do take legislators at their word that when they're making these deals, they are trying to improve the state economy. I just think it's a mistaken proposition.
Just thinking through the concept of somebody like the vice chair, self-proclaimed Democrat, socialist. Hopefully, I could say that. That's different from central planning and or communism, right? It's more of a sharing the wealth concept, but not centrally planning and dictating and going away from at least some type of market decisions. And the way that we're taking money from the people and giving it to these big corporations, whether you look at it from more of that perspective or from a free market perspective, like would be more aligned with us, this whole process is just completely eroding basic supply and demand concepts. It seems like people from all spectrums of ideology can agree that this type of central planning is just simply redistributing wealth from the hardworking middle class to the politically connected. And like you said, businesses are asking for it, but I would say they're asking for it because they have a regulatory environment that's burdensome, unreliable infrastructure or energy grid, a workforce that may not be as well prepared as we should because our education process is struggling. And they're trying to find a way to make the dollars and cents work if they're going to build here in America. And when the big corporate interests can come in and can make their offers to, hey, we'll do it here in America if we get millions or billions of dollars in handouts, then we'll do it here. If you bribe us, then we'll work here. Wouldn't it be much nicer if we just had a business-friendly environment where not only these big corporations, but also the small businesses who are struggling because they're paying full tax rates to help subsidize these big corporations' special deals? And we all suffer because of it. And is this a reasonable depiction of what's going on here and why we need to stop this whole process?
Well, I want to go back to your comment about the ideology around this, because I don't think we have good constitutional principles that are cross-ideological about using the public sector to support private development. This is one of the reasons why our state constitution requires 2/3 approval in both chambers in order to sponsor a private or to give money to a private organization. I mean, it's legislature's job to try and figure out how to best serve the public's interest. I don't think that's an ideological statement. That's the structure of our state constitution. And legislators should be especially skeptical that taking money from some people and giving it to other private businesses serves the public interest.
Perfect. Well, thank you, James, for your testimony as always. Appreciate you coming in and having the conversation with us today. With that, we will move on to our next individual, which is Mr. John Mozina, President of the Center of Economic Accountability. If you want to come up, John, when you're ready, looking forward to your testimony as always.
Thank you very much. I apologize if I'm still a little